Well, let's start with the Cincinnati Bengals, as we typically do here at the show. And I want to break down 10 players that I have a close eye on in this football game for Cincinnati. And the first one that comes to mind for me is Shamar Stewart, right? His journey here, getting here to Cincinnati, has been up and down, right? I think, when he was drafted, there was some, animosity or maybe frustration from the fan base that, there was lots of safer picks at that point in the draft, right? Malachi Starks, a safety that was available. Baltimore obviously ends up taking him. Maybe some, interior players, an offensive lineman perhaps is what a lot of people that follow the Cincinnati Bengals wanted. But no, the Bengals decided to take an edge rusher with incredibly high upside, but didn't have much production. Obviously, it's been well documented, only 4.5 sacks during his time at Texas A&M. So I think there was some frustration initially with the pick, and then people maybe started to open up their minds a little bit more, get a little bit excited, understand the raw talent that he had, especially when you hear Zach Taylor, Al Golden, Duke Tobin, even Joe Burrow talk about him and kind of starting to get on board with it. And then, of course, you had the contract saga, right? Unable to, reach terms on the contract that he wanted with the Cincinnati Bengals, when he was getting, the guaranteed money, the language in his contract, the voids in his contract. That was drama throughout really much of the offseason after he got drafted. And I think the animosity towards Shamar Stewart then ramped back up, right? Everyone's like, oh, he's sitting here bad-mouthing the organization, hasn't played a single down, seems a little bit entitled, what have you. Remember he said something along the lines of, the organization is more concerned about winning arguments than winning football games. And as, a 21, 22-year-old kid saying that after not playing a single down for the Cincinnati Bengals, I think a lot of people took that the wrong way. I certainly did myself. And then the contract gets done, and then everyone kind of comes around again saying, oh, Shamar Stewart, he's here. We're finally going to be able to see him on the football field. And then he was out there, and you saw him really be a menace out there on the field as a rookie. Saw it in spurts throughout the preseason, and I think you saw it in flashes as well in week 1. So it feels like only a matter of time before he really bursts on the scene, kind of makes a name for himself, and has a really big game where he has a couple of sacks. So he's the player that I've got circled here, because if you can come up with somebody that can be a game wrecker and a pass rusher to pair with Trey Anderson, something Cincinnati has desperately been looking for years, Shamar Stewart can be that guy. He flashed against Cleveland. Maybe week 2 is his chance to really break out and get the quarterback Trevor Lawrence on the ground and really start to make a name for himself. I'm going to be watching the Bengals first-round rookie closely in this game. And speaking of Trevor Lawrence, he's the next guy that I've got on this list. Trevor Lawrence, his journey in the NFL has certainly been very interesting. He was one of those guys where, he was a sophomore in college, maybe even a freshman in college, wins the national championship, of course, over Alabama as a freshman, and people looked at him basically saying, yeah, he's going to be the number 1 overall pick when he comes out. Obviously, after 3 years at Clemson, that's what happened. And, he earned the contract that he got. He's, one of the highest paid quarterbacks in the National Football League, but I don't know if he's necessarily lived up to that hype whatsoever, right? I think he's been a solid NFL quarterback for you, but this was a can't-miss prospect. This was one of the best prospects since, Peyton Manning or John Elway, right? People really hyped Trevor Lawrence, and I was on that hype train too, I'll be completely honest with you. But he's kind of, faltered a little bit. Does have the playoff win a couple of years ago, that dramatic comeback against the Chargers, but, he's had some injury issues, inability to stay healthy, and really hasn't necessarily always put his team in the best chance to win. He's had some really bad turnovers, some poor decisions, things that you would like to see him not do at this point in his career. But I still am a believer in Trevor Lawrence, and I still think he can play really, really well against a Bengals defense that, sure, they played well last week, but they have been poor over the past couple of years. This could also be an opportunity for Trevor Lawrence to have a big game, and he's got to be somebody that finds this list as far as you're talking about 10 players to watch. Obviously, we'll have a close eye on Trevor Lawrence. We'll see which version of Trevor Lawrence shows out, or if it's a guy that's, a little bit reckless with the football and perhaps, putting the ball in danger and turning the ball over to Cincinnati. Number 3 here on this list, I have Amarius Mims, right tackle, of course, for the Cincinnati Bengals. We'll be interested to see what kind of matchup he gets, right, whether it's Josh Hines-Allen, out there, or Trayvon Walker, right? The Jaguars do have 2 really good pass rushers. And we're probably going to be saying that every week, right? We talk about Cleveland and all the issues that they were able to cause, but that's going to be something that Cincinnati has to deal with on a week-in and week-out basis. He did pop up on the injury report with an ankle. He's been limited throughout the week. He's going to play on Sunday, but interested to see how he moves around, how he protects. I think he had a really phenomenal rookie year. Thought he did some good things against Cleveland there as well. He's your guy for the future, right? I've said it before on the show. When Orlando Brown Jr. is no longer here, I think their plan is probably to swing Amarius Mims over to that left side and be the left tackle. He's banged up, but the Bengals need him to protect well in this game. He's on this list. Also, Foyesade Oluokun, linebacker for the Jacksonville Jaguars. We spent some time talking about him on yesterday's show. I think one of the most underrated linebackers in football, is always going to be a double-digit tackle type guy week in and week out. He forced a couple of turnovers that first game against Carolina. Bengals got to be careful with him, especially if you're Chase Brown, running up the middle. Foyesade Oluokun's a guy that'll punch that ball out and, allow his team to hop on it and create turnovers. So he's also pretty good in coverage. He's a great tackler, doesn't miss many tackles. He's going to be a really important piece in this game for Jacksonville, especially if they're going to win. Bengals need to have a plan exactly for how they're going to attack the middle of the field. Got to be careful doing that against Foyesade Oluokun. Another offensive lineman here on this list for the Cincinnati Bengals is Dalton Risner. Risner, of course, going to get the start at that right guard spot. Lucas Patrick is out. He's on the IR. He has the calf injury, and the Bengals will look to Dalton Risner. Allowed one pressure in the game against Cleveland last week. Again, kind of got called into duty, right? He was just kind of signed off the street, so to speak, a couple of days before the game. Next thing you know, he's in there. He's in the action. He's in the trenches trying to protect Joe Burrow. It'll be interesting to see how he performs after a week of preparation, understanding that he is going to be the starter. But Jacksonville, their front really is good. Joe Burrow talked about in his press conference, Eric Armstead, another guy that they have in the interior. He can create some issues. That's going to be a matchup that Cincinnati needs to win or at least survive between Armstead and Dalton Risner. And Cincinnati obviously looks to hopefully run the football throughout a consistent portion of the game, because the run game looked great in the first half against Cleveland, and then it was non-existent in the second half. They're looking for a little bit more consistency, and Dalton Risner's got to be up to the challenge if they're going to play well and have some success run the football, and, of course, protecting Joe Burrow. Travis Hunter is next up here on this list for the Jacksonville Jaguars side. He was a can't-miss prospect, right? The Jaguars, of course, traded up to draft Travis Hunter. We talked about earlier in the week how he's mainly just on offense week 1 against Carolina. Liam Cohen says he's going to play more defensive snaps in week 2. And really, your focus when it comes to Travis Hunter is this. At some point, he is going to have that breakout game where he does some crazy stuff, whether it's, he's got a couple of interceptions or a couple of touchdowns or is just flying around the field making all kinds of plays. That's going to happen in a matter of weeks. And if you're Cincinnati, your goal is to make sure that doesn't happen here in week 2. If you remember last year, right, that Monday night game earlier in the season against the Commanders, that was Jaden Daniels' coming out party, right? That was early in the year. People, obviously, there was hype around Jaden Daniels, but they didn't really know exactly what he could be. Well, he burst on the scene against you in your stadium in primetime in front of the whole country and played an unbelievable game. Joe Burrow was unbelievable in that game as well. You could argue that Jaden Daniels was just a tick better, and it allowed Washington to win the game. You don't want a similar situation where Travis Hunter has one of those types of games. Obviously, he's not a quarterback, but again, has the ability to really burst on the scene and win a game for a team. That's going to happen for Jacksonville at some point. That's just the type of caliber of player that Travis Hunter is. Your goal if you're Cincinnati is to make sure that doesn't happen in this game. If he's out there defensively, it'll be interesting to see who he is matched up with, whether it be Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, whether he's in the slot against a guy like Yoshi or what have you. But Travis Hunter, obviously there's going to be a lot of hype around him coming into this game, and really interested to see how he plays and what the Bengals' plan for him is in this game as well. Jamar Chase, next guy on this list. Jamar against Cleveland, he's had throughout his career some games where he just doesn't do much against Cleveland. Got to kind of tip your hat to the Browns, kind of a reoccurring theme in a lot of ways, right? Particularly earlier in the season on the road in Cleveland, something we've discussed at length here on the show, but Bengals got to get him the football. right? I don't care if you're handing it off to him. I don't care if it's a screen pass. I don't care if it's a little button hook on a short route. I don't care if it's an option route. I don't care if you're chucking it deep down the field. He has to touch the ball more than they did against Cleveland. And there were elements to last season where we would have a couple of these games early, and Zach Taylor would basically we got to find a way to get him the ball. I get it, right? Defenses, their number one plan coming into a game against the Bengals is how can we slow down number one? How can we avoid number one killing us in this game? So that makes things a little bit difficult for Cincinnati. But the caliber of player that Jamar Chase is, he has to touch the football on a consistent basis throughout the game. If he does that, Cincinnati is going to be in position to win a lot of football games. He's the best wide receiver in the National Football League. I think that argument has kind of been put to rest, but the Bengals, Zach Taylor, Joe Burrow have to get him the football, and he's going to have some matchups in this game that he certainly can win, right? The cornerbacks of the Jaguars aren't necessarily the strong suit of their football team. There's going to be safety help over the top with Jamar, but get him the ball in space and amazing things can happen. We all know that. Jamar Chase certainly a guy on this list, and he's got to touch the ball more than he did in Week 1. Travis Etienne, running back for the Jacksonville Jaguars. The Bengals had a lot of success in the Cleveland game, slowing down the run, stopping the run. That was against Dylan Sampson. A little bit different here with Travis Etienne. Maybe his career hasn't exactly panned out how people thought, but Jaguars make an aggressive move. They get rid of Tank Bigsby, right? They're kind of rolling the dice with Travis Etienne, saying, we believe in you. You were a top pick for us a couple of years ago. You flashed before in the past. You're going to be our guy. You're going to be our workhorse. I think fantasy owners around there that maybe got him a little bit later than he went in previous years got to be a little bit happy about that. Also, they have the rookie Bashal Tutin, who clearly they have belief in if they're going to move Tank Bigsby. But Travis Etienne's going to get a lot of touches in this game, and I'm really interested to see how the Bengals' run defense looks in Week 2. I think we're at the point in the year where it's like there's not really trends, right? You really can't say this is a theme. We just have one game to go off of against a mediocre at best opponent, and the Bengals' run defense looked really, really good. Is the Jaguars' run offense really, really good? No, right? Are they a step above Cleveland? Yes. So if the Bengals can kind of match that a little bit and still play solid in this game against the run, that will be really interesting. Make Trevor Lawrence beat you with his arm. See if you can't take Travis Etienne away in this game. But Etienne's a really versatile back. He can run it in between the tackles. And probably even more importantly than that, he is a threat out of the backfield to catch the football. And there's going to be lots of opportunities in this game. If they're dumping it down to Travis Etienne, the Bengals are going to have to make one-on-one tackles in space. They did that against Cleveland. We'll see if they can do that again here in Week 2 against Travis Etienne. Two more players here on this list. Jordan Battle next up for Cincinnati at that safety spot. Really happy with what you got from Battle. Speaking of open field tackles, he was there to make them against Cleveland. Had the unbelievable interception off the deflection against Joe Flacco in that football game as well. And Battle was a guy where the Bengals rolled the dice on him, right? I think a lot of people were saying, we don't feel good about the safeties. Why aren't you drafting a safety? Why aren't you signing a safety in free agency? After all these cuts right before the season, why aren't you signing a safety off the street? The Bengals sat there and said, we believe in Jordan Battle. Preseason was ugly for Jordan Battle. There was, reports in camp that he wasn't necessarily having the best camp as well. Week 1, when it really, really mattered, he did a tremendous job. Is that a fluke performance for Jordan Battle, or is that something that he can do consistently throughout the entirety of an NFL football season? Because if Battle plays the way that he did in Week 1, regardless of how Geno Stone, his partner there at that safety position, plays, your safety play is going to be a lot better. Really impressed with Jordan Battle. Question for him, was it kind of a fluky performance, or can he carry that over into this game against the Jacksonville Jaguars? He's not going to get an interception in every single game. I'm not going to evaluate him based on that. I'm going to evaluate him on making sure receivers don't get over the top of that defense, and when he's in this position to make a one-on-one tackle, he makes it. That's what he did against Week 1. We'll see if he can carry that over in this game. Last up here is Jourdan Lewis, nickel for the Jacksonville Jaguars. We talked about him earlier in the week. Again, kind of alluded to, Dallas let him go. Big head scratcher for me. He was a really important part to that defense. Jaguars aren't paying him a ton, but he's out there for Jacksonville. He's a nickel. He lines up in the slot, but will they move him at all? Outside is something I'm interested to see. He's really good against the run as well. I expect him to kind of run up and make some tackles on Chase Brown in the run game. But the matchup with who he exactly is guarding will be interesting. The Bengals, of course, moved Jamar all over the field. He can line up in the slot. Will they be matched up there? Yoshi, obviously your third receiver, your slot guy, he didn't get a single target in that game. Again, you didn't really complete a lot of passes in the game, so that's understandable, I guess. But that matchup there with Jourdan Lewis will certainly be interesting. He had a turnover and recovered a fumble, I believe, in that Carolina game there as well. He's a really good player, one of the leaders on that defense, a veteran guy despite it being his first year in Jacksonville, and that's going to be a tremendous challenge for Cincinnati in this football game as well. So there you have it. That's kind of 10 players that I've got an eye on here in this game. I think it's going to be close. As far as a prediction, I think Cincinnati wins, moves to 2-0, but I don't think this is a situation where they blow Jacksonville out at home. I think it's kind of a back and forth type game. I think the defense maybe regresses a little bit based on what you saw in Week 1 against Cleveland. I think Jacksonville is able to score some points with Trevor Lawrence at the helm, but I do think Cincinnati wins. Don't feel comfortable with that 3.5. That isn't going to be on one of our best bets later in the show, but I do think Cincinnati ends up winning this football game in Week 2.